Well, let's go ahead and get started. I will call the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. on April 5th, 2022. For the continued public hearing of the 40B application of Jeffrey Engler of SLV School Street LLC to be known as a sanctuary at Manchester by the Sea for a comprehensive permit under Mass General Laws, Chapter 40B, Sections 20 through 23, to construct a 136-unit apartment complex for which the Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency issued a project eligibility decision on September 16, 2021 at School Street, Assessor's Map number 43, lot number 18, filed with the town clerk on September 27th, 2021. I'm Sarah Mellish, the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I have with me Jim Dietrich, Sean Zahn, John Benares, Catherine Howe, Ryan Solacey, and I expect that James Mitchell will be joining us shortly.
I'm here.
And James Mitchell. We were going to begin with the architect's peer review. Is Mr. Bomer on? Yes.
I am. I'm here.
Great. Would you like to walk us through your peer review and point out to us things that we should pay particular attention to?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and thanks for asking me to present tonight. I think it might be helpful, given that there are, by my count, 46 participants in this meeting right now, if I clarify my qualifications and my role. I'm an architect. I've been a designer of housing developments for about 30 years. And most of our housing developments that my firm does design do include a high percentage of affordable housing. So I think it's fair to say that I'm very sensitive to the needs of that tranche of housing or tenancy in developments. My role, I've been retained by the Zoning Board of Appeals to opine on the design of the development. I'm not the designer of the development. My role is not to provide alternative designs for the development, but it's really to maintain an arm's length distance, understanding the incredible need for affordable housing in the state, but at the same time understanding how Chapter 40B works in the zoning system and the types of dynamic that virtually always occurs between zoning boards and proponents of 40B developments. I think most people on this call probably understand that most 40B developments are of greater density than surrounding context. Most are. I consider my role largely to work to help get the best possible fit for that development in the site that has been proposed for the development. That's important for a lot of reasons. A good fit is supported by the statute itself, but it also just makes sense that a good fit works because that is what ensures, as much as anything, the long-term sustainability of any development is being a place that integrates itself into the neighborhood, is attractive to residents, and is appreciated by existing residents. I think so to be as clear as I can, I see my major role as as really looking at impact that the project has. A big part of that for me is the impact on the public realm. That is all the areas where non-residents look at the project and develop their opinions about it. That's extremely important. At the same time, I believe that it's equally important to ensure that the design of the development is going to work for the future residents of the development. So both of those aspects are pretty fundamental to the reviews that I've undertaken. I've worked in a lot of communities across Massachusetts on 40B developments. I think this one is in the top 10% as far as the amount of materials that have been produced, commentary and peer review reports, etc. This one has gotten a lot of attention for a lot of reasons, and I understand that. I think it's probably most useful, and I appreciate the chair's guidance on this. I'm not going to read the report. It's 6 dense pages, and I don't intend to put all of you to sleep. But I want you to know that first and foremost, before I really dial in on architecture, you know, the materials, the exposure of clapboards, detailed articulation of the buildings, sizes of windows, trim, all those sorts of things. For me, I really want to know that the project sits on the site properly, that it really has weighed the impact that it has on the public realm. And given that, as I stated earlier, that most 40B developments are of greater density and magnitude than surrounding context, for me, I think it's important, and it generally is for the communities where these projects are sited, that everything has been done within reason to make the project fit in with the existing pattern of development. So having said that, I think I'm going to skim right across the top, and I think my greatest value might be in fielding questions from board members. But starting at the top, I think everyone understands that to talk about the existing pattern of development that surrounds this proposed project has special meaning. The development around the project, it's largely undeveloped around the project, heavily wooded, not a lot of visibility into the development that does exist, some public open space nearby, and a lot of, in the case of this particular site, a lot of topography changes that really doesn't even make it obvious as a developable site. So I think the notion of discuss, and as we all know, the base zoning is limited commercial in this area. It's not part of Manchester by the Sea's plan to create housing in these locations, in this location. So I think that when one understands that, it kind of brings particular importance to understand how the project is perceived from the public realm. It doesn't fit into a pattern of development because there really isn't much of a pattern of development. So the project is really presenting itself as unique. And I think wherever this development lands, as far as how much of the rock is removed, its elevation off of School Street, how long the driveway is, whether it uses clapboards or shingles, all of these things are not going to really change the fact that it will be perceived as something that is unique in Manchester by the Sea. That there is no development comparable to this in the town. That I'm not saying that as a value judgment at all. I just see that as a fact on the ground. It is a unique development. And I think you'll notice if you've filtered through the report that I sent 2 weeks ago, much of my commentary, a good bit of it, bounces back to the point of not really understanding how the development is perceived from the public realm, particularly School Street. I have my doubts of whether it can be seen from 128. I don't really know. And even Old School Street and the approach from the north in Essex, I really don't know what this project is going to look like. So one of the most, generally speaking, one of the most important expectations of my review is to help shed light on my understanding of how it will be perceived from the public realm. And in this case, I can't do it. The materials are not sufficient for me to understand what this project really will look like from School Street, any place on School Street, certainly 128, etc. I think that is a very important factor for a number of reasons. And I would urge the board to push very hard to get accurate representation of this project. And it sweeps broadly. As you know, it is an aggressive approach to development. I don't know if these estimates are correct, but the one estimate that I was able to access posited that something like 270,000 cubic yards of material would be displaced. I don't know how much of that material is maintained on site because there is a lot of retaining wall construction that has to happen in order to build the plateau that's broad enough to accommodate this program. I don't know exactly the impact of the amount of clearing that would have to happen just for the plateau area, not to mention the roadway, as well as an accessible path, pedestrian path that needs to be made down to Summer Street, that I believe would also result in additional clearing on the site, as well as clearing that is going to happen in the remote areas that are dedicated to infiltration on the southern part of the site. So the long and short of it is that I hope you understand that I'm operating at a deficit. Most developments are relatively easy to understand that kind of visual impact that it has on the environment. I would posit that it's not possible from the materials that have been provided that you can do that in this development. So for me, that's really important. I think what would lead from that, from having an understanding, from having the developer commit to the appearance of this project, it would allow advancement of a discussion about how to make sure that we are getting the best project that we possibly can. And at that point, once we understand what we can actually see of the development, then a discussion of whether the footprint's adequately articulated, whether the 3-story parts join seamlessly with the 4-story parts of the project, all of the aspects that are kind of traditional aesthetic architectural discussions would spring from that, in my opinion. So I think because you see that so many times in my report, that looms large. in my mind, to be able to have a really accurate depiction of the development as seen from the public realm. The associated issue that I have with the project, and that's the other half of what I started this description of my scope as, is understanding the quality of life for the future residents of the development. Clearly, there are a multitude of advantages of living in a community as privileged as Manchester by the Sea is, and we'd hope that all the residents would feel a good connection to that. However, I think another fact on the ground, so to speak, is that the site is isolated. And in this case, it's something like at least 1.5, maybe 1.7 miles from the town center. The many residents are able to walk to, enjoy interaction during their walks, communicate with other people in the town. That's a lot more challenging from this site. So there's a distance issue, just in plan distance. But in the case of this development, it's also, I guess you'd say, vertically challenged. And because the roadway, and I think you've all read numerous commentaries on the roadway, it's very long, something like 1,800 feet. Parts of it are pretty steeply sloped. It's the only access road down to the street. And I think that it's not really reasonable to believe that people will hike up and down that pathway happily to access the path on Old School Street on a regular basis. I see it as challenging vertically. And even when there is what I believe is a code mandated accessible path provided, that will make the pedestrian path even longer than the vehicular path is. So where that comes, that in and of itself is not, I mean, it may sound rather value laden, but only in the sense that I think the way that you can mitigate that isolation is through self-sufficiency. And there are certainly locations that argue, I mean, the name of the development itself is sanctuary, and to me that has a kind of self-sufficiency context to it. And what I am troubled by, excuse me, what I'm troubled by in this site plan is a really serious deficiency of programmable outdoor space. And I think, again, given the unit count, the number of children that are likely to be on the site, I'm not seeing really enough space for active recreation of children on the site. And I think from a sustainable perspective, from just a day-to-day life expectation of parents with young children, I don't think that they should be expected to have to get into a car every time they want to throw a Frisbee around with their children. There is one space that could potentially be used, although you access it in a very awkward way. It's an area of the site that is designated as snow storage, but no other program is ascribed to that space. So I understand why it is the way it is, that in order to make that platform large enough just for the basic engineering functioning of the site, it leaves precious little area for usable outdoor space. The other issue is, of course, back to what I said, I think without really having a clearer understanding of the amount of clearing of existing mature vegetation that would have to happen on the site, and not knowing the nature of what remains behind, whether it's deciduous or evergreen, it's just really hard to get a grip on what you're left with. Other examples of the kind of problems, frankly, that a site like this presents to a developer. Even very simple things. I think at-grade developments can successfully employ dark sky lighting fixtures, for example, where they're not really diminishing the view of the dark sky at night for the neighborhood. In a project that's really perched up on top of a hill, it's a lot more challenging to do that. You can have perfectly compatible or compliant dark sky fixtures, but they're seen very clearly from down below. So they're special challenges that even affect very detailed level kinds of decisions that need to be made in the normal process of developing the design. Keep in mind these are schematic designs for those of you who aren't familiar with reading architectural documents. These are in a very schematic mode. So I think it's really important to understand that. Suburban projects are usually driven by site engineering issues generally, because particularly when there's on-site septic, the engineering issues are going to kind of lead the way in a project, and architecture follows that. So I would say, and I'm sure the proponent would agree, that the engineering drawings are probably further developed than the architectural drawings. But even in that respect, I think, planting a sizable project in an area that's really surrounded by sensitive wetlands, river setback, et cetera, there are a lot of technical issues that are beyond my scope. I've read everything, at least that have been posted since March 21st when I submitted my letter. And I would urge the board to really dig deep on environmental issues. I think the name of the game isn't solving whether you can do it, it's whether you can do it technically, and at the end of the day, everybody's proud of what's built and appreciates what it's contributing to the community. And for me, it's very difficult. I think maybe that's the introduction without going into great detail. I think it's a very tough site to develop. I think basic issues that have been brought up by others about construction management, a cut and fill analysis, what is actually the mechanism of building the retaining walls of this scale. There aren't adequate details at all that help me understand the feasibility of it. It's structural or otherwise. They're retaining walls that appear to be, they would have to be lined, I'm imagining. They are actually retaining either effluent from sewage or stormwater. They have special issues of hydrostatic pressure. So I think that the developer has I don't want to lose the goal of creating affordable housing for Manchester by the Sea. It is extremely important, critical issue. But I think in this particular application, beyond the technical issues that are daunting, I think there are real questions about self-sufficiency and making this a project that really will ensure that people will want to live here in the long run. So that's where I'm at. I think you know that there is a lot more material in my letter. I would urge, I appreciate that the board did on their own initiative, or at least some entity in town, it may have been the planning department, did obtain that advisory opinion from the Architectural Access Board. I strongly support that opinion. I'm not aware of exceptions that are made to providing accessible pathways to a public road in any developments. And I think it's pretty clear, even if it did miss the attention of your own local enforcement, your building inspector, who could possibly miss it. A lot of people do. I don't think that's the right approach in a development of this magnitude, to not have an accessible path and a safe path. Even if it ended up being a pathway, if the roadway got regraded, and walking down the roadway, certainly a number of people who've commented on the development have safety concerns about residents walking down the roadway or children biking down the roadway. So I think that probably is enough. I'm happy to open up to questions. At the end of the report, I did have a number of kind of basic bullet points, ideas of, a transportation demand management plan, that could include a shuttle bus that maybe really facilitates getting residents into downtown Manchester, zip car spaces, etc. But if it pleases the chair, I would leave it at that and open it up to questions.
Thank you. Members of the board, John, do you have any questions?
Mr. Bomer, I appreciate your presentation, and your letter was very thorough. Overall, I agree with the points that you made, and these have been hot button issues since day one. I guess a question that I have is, based on the current scope, what's your sort of rough estimate on a construction timeline from initial closing to C of Os, given all this site work that we have in this case?
Well,
rough estimates.
Yeah. Well, let me say that I think a lot of that would have to do with having a better understanding of what's actually being proposed to be built. I think that probably leading the way on that is a cut and fill analysis, so we know how much has to go off site versus used for fill behind the retaining walls that are proposed. Understanding the nature of the retaining walls would help. But a development, let me say that a simple project of this scale on a flat site could easily take 18 months. So how long this would take, it's not the architect who decides that, it's really the construction team that decides that. But it's a non-trivial construction period.
Okay, thank you for that. And is it fair to say that we have about the total site's about 15 acres, and about 7 or so acres are going to be disturbed with just the actual building construction? I mean, is it fair to say that a lot of the surrounding property could be will be very adversely impacted by the trucks moving in and out and all the site work, and just the overall impact of site excavations and blasting and things of that nature? Because we're just sensitive to the wetlands and the vernal pools and everything else that's in that area, as you've seen walking that site.
Yeah. That's a good question. Do take note that 7 or so, I think my own calculation was right around 7 or so acres. There's also disruption in the area that's proposed for the septic system as well on the other side of the wetlands. So I just want to be clear, it's a significantly greater area that would actually be disturbed. As far as protecting neighboring properties, my experience is that depending, an analysis really needs to be done of whether or not blasting is required, whether it's removed by other means, but all of those can be done in a responsible fashion. I think if the board were apprised of the need to do a large amount of blasting, what I've seen happen in other communities, and I know Mr. Engler has too, is to have the team present, have a blasting expert present to the board and potentially the board reviewing that. There aren't any really close neighbors, so a lot of the issues that you would encounter in urban environments don't exist. And I can say I've seen with my own eyes blasting that happens very close to existing construction with minimal impact. So that per se, to me, the trucking, the amount of trucking, I don't know how much stays on site and how much goes off site. That's generally managed with police details, timing of deliveries and offloading the materials off site. It's manageable. It would certainly be different from anything that's been seen in that part of town. I'm sure of that. But a good construction manager, I think it's doable.
Yeah, and what struck me in your report was that you estimated anywhere between 17,000 to 27,000, truckloads of material that could be removed off site.
But again, I want to make sure everybody understands that the number of cubic yards of material that would be removed was, I believe it was in the Chessie report. There was a report that made an estimate. That was not an estimate from the developer, who will certainly want to know that information for their own purposes.
Yeah.
And again, there are big dump trucks and little dump trucks. So I took the range of little trucks and big trucks, but it's still a lot of dump truck loads if most of that material is going off site, which I don't know because I haven't seen that analysis.
And what's your take on the single driveway rather than having a separate access road for emergencies and things of that nature?
Well, it's not optimal. I don't think anyone, while it could meet all required codes, which it could, and this is more of a civil engineering issue than an architectural issue, I think most people would probably argue that it's not optimal. In my report, again, because I was trying to put my head in the place of the residents, I was thinking of what happens on snowy days and you need to get your kids down to the bottom of the hill to the school bus. That's kind of the level I was thinking of it at, not there being a massive emergency with trees crossing the roadway, etc.
No, I agree that the day-to-day stuff is important. If you have kids riding their bikes down the driveway, for instance, and then you have cars coming up, for me, I'd be concerned about that as a resident. Well, thanks again for your time. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Jim Dietrich, do you have questions?
I never saw the report, Madam Chair. While this gentleman's been speaking, I've been frantically going through everything on my computer and I never got a copy of it. So I really don't know what was submitted. I only heard what the gentleman said. And so basically I don't feel qualified to ask a question about this at this time.
Thank you. James Mitchell, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have several. I want to thank Clifford for your really outstanding and very thorough report, as John Benares had mentioned. I had about 12 different questions, but for the sake of time, I'd like to keep them to what I consider to be probably the two most important with respect to lasting impact to the community. The first one is your concern about a lack of information, specifically perspective drawings and renderings. I think the hardest thing for all of us is what will this look like? And what kind of recommendations would you be suggesting the board ask for the developer to provide Are they massing models? Are they computer generated topographical models, flyovers? I mean, I don't know all the proper visual terms, but I do think that we could have a much clearer understanding. You mentioned, for example, that you're not really sure if we would see it coming northbound from Essex, if we'd even see it, or if it would be seen from Route 128. There are 4-story elements to this. There is significant wooded areas, a lot of which will be cleared. We also understand that they're going to be lopping off 10 or 20 or 30 feet off the top of this hill. So I guess that's my first question is what specifically, or could you provide us with a list of suggestions for those graphic representations or visual elements that would help us and the rest of the community really understand what this is going to look like?
Happily, and thanks for that question, because that it is fundamental to the problems I'm having in reviewing the development. I know this architecture firm very well. They've actually been the architect on a good number of 40B developments in other communities. So I know them well, and I know their technical abilities. What they've provided on numerous other developments are accurate 3-dimensional computer models of the site, as with the proposed project planted, in this case, on top of the hill. I would expect to see accurate representation of screening that would be provided by vegetation left in place, and realistic views of where it is visible. We want to know it's visible, and then we can launch into a discussion about the treatment of that. So it's a technology they're very well aware of. I think they either, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, they're probably either using generally SketchUp 3-dimensional modeling, or they're using Revit. But they do have accurate surveys of the site. I would expect them to incorporate that survey into their model. It's all about the grades and the vegetation, and then of course the building scale. I think it's interesting that my understanding is, I didn't review the first iteration of this project, but my understanding is they did lose a story on the project. I think it used to be 4 stories, maybe 4 stories plus 5 stories where the parking was. Now it's 3 plus 4. So the scale is relatively modest. And so that there may very well be effective ways of screening, if required, screening of the development from the street. So the architect knows what I'm talking about. They've done this on a number of other projects. What you will want to see is street level perspective views from critical points. You probably know them more than I know them. I think it would be, if the project does turn out to be visible, I think you'd like to know where it becomes visible. When you're going north on Summer Street towards Essex, at what point does it become visible? And similarly, coming from the south, looking up at it, where it's visible and how much of that elevation is visible. As you know, it is a very long elevation, which is why I started this by saying I don't think there's anything that you can do to this building tectonically that will make it look like the little houses in downtown Manchester by the sea. It's not. It will never look like that. But it doesn't mean it can't look good. And you do have a qualified architect, a very qualified architect on the team. And that would be my expectation.
Okay, well, thank you for that. The second thing is kind of areas of concern about the quality of life for residents. And you mentioned the isolation from the town. It's about 1.7 miles out. It's also isolated vertically from the street. And so that brings a whole host of concerns in areas that we would at least tonight, I think maybe ask for some guidance on what additional information you might be willing to share with us that we could ask for. The fact that it's not pedestrian friendly is one area of concern. The other issue is about the people and the vehicle circulation concerns that you brought up. You mentioned maybe a school bus. You've also mentioned EV parking spaces, the need for bicycle parking. All of those are details I think that could be incorporated when asked for. You even mentioned dark sky compliance with lighting, landscape buffering, also car sharing spaces, a detailed transportation management demand program. All of these things are really critical to helping us decide on the appropriateness and what we may ask of the developer. But the bigger issue here to me is consideration given, as you said, to study mechanisms that will foster the integration of the development with the town at large. And you state specifically that other than to visit residents, the site offers little that would be inviting to anyone who doesn't live there. And you had suggested that there might be a pathway or bike pathway or some kind of entry drive so residents could explore around the site. I'm wondering how else what you might recommend would work to more fully integrate this community being so isolated with the rest of the town. And failing that, how would it become more self-sufficient without any other uses up there? There's no convenience store, not that I'm suggesting that's necessary, but you also mentioned specifically the lack of outdoor space for kids. And I'm not sure how that would be achievable. And I know this is kind of a long-winded question. There's a lot to unbundle there. But I think that's the big thing for the town going forward, is looking at the quality of life for the people who live there and how it's integrated with the rest of the community. Perhaps you could share some more detailed thoughts on that.
We start by unmuting myself. Well, thank you for your thorough reading of my letter. You know, it's you see a lot of different things in a lot of different developments, but what we would all like to see in 40B developments, because again, by nature, they're often not something that fits perfectly or organically into the way that towns are developed. So it's always challenging. The specifics of those comments at the end are kind of related to the issue that I brought up early on about, given where the site is and the topography of the site, the developer has created a lot of problems for themselves to solve. It doesn't mean they're not solvable, but by choosing this site, they've taken on a lot of challenges. You know, I think that as far as I think you have to think about there's obvious draw for the residents on the top of that hill to go to downtown Manchester by the Sea for all the reasons all of you enjoy it, and I've enjoyed it many times myself. That's easy to see, but it's kind of one-sided. And I think that really good integration happens when you create environments that are inviting to the people who don't live there. I think a good example that this development does have, it's got a swimming pool. A lot of places where people live in Manchester by the Sea don't have a swimming pool. So I could imagine people being invited up there to use the swimming pool. I think that's probably not enough, though, to create a kind of environment. And I don't want to get too specific about it. You're probably going to figure out that I have a good number of grandchildren, but the creating an environment where people will really be motivated to invite their friends over to their house, which is up on top of the hill and very distinctive. For all we know, it may have terrific views that could be wonderful for people to share. But as the project sits right now, it's really limited. The passive recreation spaces in that north courtyard, I don't think are adequate for the number of school-age children that you'd expect to see come to this development. And I would think many, it's kind of obvious that many people would want to be in Manchester by the Sea because of quality school system. So that means school-age children. Your question was long. I mean, maybe I've lost some of the details. I would just expect to see, I'll tell you one conundrum that I think this developer has, because I think they would want as much as anybody would want for their development to be desirable to everybody. People would want to be there. People would want to bring their kids there to visit the residents there. Who would not want that? A kind of traditional fix that can be applied to many developments is if there's really insufficient outdoor space, sometimes cutting down on the scope of the development to create more open space would be a solution. The challenge, and again, in that number of issues that I think are problems that have been created by the developer by themselves, for themselves, if you cut down on the number of units on this development, all of those massive site costs, which are huge on this project, are spread over even fewer units. So the kind of simple solutions that you can bring to developments that aren't quite as physically challenged as this one may not be available in this development. On the other hand, if you really had a good idea what it looked like from the street, maybe part of the development could be 4 stories, 4 residential stories. If it's not visible from the street, if it's not introducing adverse impact from the public realm, that could open up more space. You know, if you go higher in some parts of the building that are less visible, that could open up ground plane space. That could create active recreation space instead of, you know, adult passive recreation. But, you know, I know I repeated myself about 10 times in the report already. I'll do it again now. It's just hard to know. It's hard to help come up with solutions when we're kind of hamstrung as far as really understanding what the development really looks like.
Well, thank you for that. And you've made some excellent comments. I think the idea of maybe changing the massing of the building to reduce the footprint by going taller vertically, the massing study and the 3D modeling would help with that decision making, I think. The last question I had was surrounding what you called, I believe it was called, with respect to the environmental concerns. This site is really pushing every environmental consideration to the max. And you mentioned that there's no slack in the event of whether it's construction related incidents or other environmental related consequences that might emerge over the course of the project. There's not a lot of room to give here. And is that something that could be overcome without changing the scale of this project? What's your opinion on that?
You know, the board really needs expert opinion on this. So I know quite a lot on the subject, but don't rely on my opinion. I think the simplest way to express my concern is because it is so densely packed between the building footprint, the parking level footprint, the access road, retaining walls, et cetera, et cetera. If there is failure in any of the systems, you know, particularly stormwater and sewer effluent, you know, effluent from the sewage treatment. And if you did find that it was adversely impacting surrounding sensitive environmental areas, I don't know what you could do to fix it. You don't have any more area right on the site that could diminish potential breakout, you know, horizontal breakout. It's not my field. I think I think you need to be comfortable that you have the level of expertise to really help you think through any potential issues that could emerge if the systems really aren't adequately designed on day one.
Thank you for that.
Brian?
That's all I had.
Oh, thanks. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. I think James did a remarkable job in wrapping up a lot of things. One of my concerns all along has been the isolation of this particular building. You can sugarcoat it, you can call it anything you want. It's going to be an entity unto itself. There's no synergy with downtown. There's no synergy with the town, period. It's going to be a freestanding monolith without access, other than the address of Manchester. It really isn't Manchester. I would ask Mr. Bomer, in your experience, will you have the counts, the unit counts, and the mix and unit mixes? Do you have any expertise in that area? I'm looking at. That doesn't look like this is going to be a family-friendly development. It's going to be a developer-friendly development, but not a family-friendly development. And if we are in fact trying to entice or bring in new blood, new families into the community, I'd like to see more 2s and 3s. Is this a common mix that you see to other comparable developments of this size?
Well, no, it probably is a little more heavily weighted towards 1-bedroom units, but the state considers 2-bedroom units, family units as well. And I think this development does meet state standards for the percentage of units that are 3-bedroom units. But to your point, generally, you probably see a higher percentage of 1-bedroom units. But how that really fits in Manchester is sort of beyond my level of expertise.
So what I'm seeing is a number of 1-bedrooms, which will probably be they're going to use this as a grab and go. Manchester address, they're going to sleep, they're going to drive, they're going to take off. They probably won't be really impacting the downtown area. It's just more of a traffic count as opposed to the family issues. And I'm just, again, my concern is we are looking to expand our affordable housing base for families, and this doesn't seem to be, although it meets, and that's one of the things that Mr. Engler has been saying all along, he meets minimum state requirements, and that's the only thing that we're looking at this point. And I'm just curious as to, have you seen other developments with larger numbers of 2s and 3s than 1s?
Definitely that, but I would point out, again, just based on how the state discusses this issue, that there are 96 bedrooms that are not primary bedrooms in the development. So when I make a point about the deficiency of on-site active recreation space, that's what I look at as sort of the extra bedrooms that are on the project that could be filled by children. So I think there is definitely in this project a greater percentage of 1s than I've seen in a lot of developments. I would still maintain that there's a very good chance that that ultimately there will be a large number of children living there.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Brian, could I just piggyback on your question there? It's James again.
By all means, James.
I think,
Through the chair, please.
Sarah, may I ask a question?
Yes.
The unit mix in the report is 55 1-bedroom, 66 2-bedroom, and 15 3-bedroom units. I think what would be helpful for all of us to better understand, what is the breakout of bedroom mix for the affordable units? That's another way to consider to whom this project might serve.
I think
And
that's
I think
mandated.
that's a question for the developer.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's a state mandate, as it has to be across all units. type.
I think-
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sean, do you have any questions? You went to sleep.
No, John and James pretty much covered every question that I had. I just want to say thank you for such a thorough report.
Okay, thanks. Catherine?
No, I don't. I don't have any questions. I've reviewing the report and listening to everyone's comments. I think I have some good ideas about adopting some of these suggestions, but I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. I have one question. And that is that you seem to reference the fact that perhaps the amount of outdoor recreational space is not sufficient for the number of bedrooms within the development, particularly because of it's isolated. Are there any type of standards that one could apply that would say X number of square feet of recreational space per bedroom or per person? Is there anything like that that could give us guidance on in what direction we might head?
Sort of. It's a kind of thing that you can kind of reverse engineer, I think, is that the landscape architect, if there were, for example, a tot lot proposed on the development, the way a landscape architect would approach that is that they would get from the developer who's done their market research a projection of the number of children and school-age children across the variety of ages, and would design the playground accordingly, that there are clearances required around all the playground equipment that are appropriate for different ages of children. So you can approach it that way. There are standards that matter that have to do with effective, safe playgrounds, accessible playgrounds, that meet all the requirements that would give you the kind of areas that you need. So I would say, no, there's no real strong rule of thumb that I'm aware of, but you can get there pretty quickly by thinking about the program that you have on space that you'd like to accommodate. For example, I've reviewed a number of developments with very, very large dog run areas, because as we know, a lot of people like having dogs. And, between dog runs for large dogs and small dogs, plus a tot lot, plus an area suitable for throwing Frisbees around, for 12-year-olds can take up quite a lot of space. But it all kind of starts from the projected population of the development.
Okay, thank you. So I've heard from all of the board, I believe. Gary Gilbert from our planning board has asked if he could ask some questions. So you can go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Sarah. Mr. Engler had his hand up first, though, but I don't know if you want to let him chime in. Okay, I would just call out one comment made in the report from Mr. Bomer in section 5D. He makes a statement that because the base zoning of the building is commercial, that one could make the argument that the structure doesn't necessarily have to resemble a typical residential housing types. And I'm not sure why that statement was made, but to my mind, that's something I think we all want to focus on. We want to make this a residential structure, a handsome one. I think there's a promise here that we can get there. This architectural firm is very talented. They've done some beautiful Kendall Square style architecture. What we need is a handsome New England Village style architecture, if we can work that into it. And I really agree with Mr. Bomer that we don't know what's really being built. or proposed. The getting site elevations, not just building elevations, or you could call them street elevations, but something that would show quite a bit of all the topography and perhaps today's foliage and full foliage superimposed on it accurately would be helpful. I'm sure the developer has photographs, ample photographs on their computers of what this site looks like from different views when all the trees have leafed out, as well as they stand today. One thing that would help us is to get at least some bays, some key bays of the building to the level of design development drawings. And in architecture world, that means something that really represents the true materials being used, the scale of the materials, exactly how are you going to modulate the facades? Are they just going in and out 6 inches or a few feet? You know, what sort of materials, what bays, and how the exterior portions of the exterior will actually be articulated. It'd be good to start having that conversation sooner rather than later, so we have a chance to really work with the architects and perhaps together come up with, as Mr. Bomer said, solutions to challenges here. One thing that our New England Village accomplishes is it has a lot of Victorian buildings which have a beautiful human sense of scale to them. And that's because of building elements and materials used. And this can be done with contemporary modern materials also. It's there's a lot of room for inventiveness there. And it could be in the end something that we're all happy with, or reasonably more happy with, let's say, than as it stands. And I support that people should open their minds to and potentially consider somewhat smaller footprint to get some modulated vertical height in this building. Some 4-story elements could really help the building out in key areas. I think this building will be somewhat seen from some areas. We have to get beyond that. It's a question of where you do it and how does it really help the whole composition of the building facades. And finally, I would just say this whole idea of connection, I see there being 3 needs for connection. People talk about ADA ramps, but that's a 2-edged sword. It chews up a lot of space to put those in. They probably will have to do them, but considering the topography, there's going to be a lot of ramps, shallow ramps and landings, ramps and landings, ramps and landings. Nobody's going to want to use them except the handicapped that need to use them. Nobody on a bicycle is going to want to ride on those things. People walking, if there's too many of them, you're going to cut through. So there probably should also be walking paths there. Maybe that could be an informal pathway of asphalt or stone. And then bicycles. How are they going to go to and from the site? There seems to me that there needs to be 3 types of pathways to and from it, because they'll be created regardless. People will drive through the grass and turn it into mud. It'll become slippery. Someone's going to fall. Maybe there'll be a lawsuit. So it's better to anticipate that and include it in the project design. But I feel kind of hopeful because this architectural firm is skilled and Mr. Bomer has a lot of experience working with them. And I'm glad he's on board. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Jim Dietrich on the board, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Engler, okay? Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Bomer, since I made my initial comments, I received 3 copies of your report. So I appreciate the extent that the work you put into it, and I thank you very much. You're an architect, am I correct?
Yes.
If you were approached by a client to build a building such as the sanctuary on that particular location, what would be your first opinion?
Oh, boy. Again, I'll just flip back briefly to my role. You know, it's really tough. I think all architects believe that all problems are solvable with beautiful solutions at the end of the day. So I just want to say that it's, I can understand the appeal of developing a site like this. I think from my own perspective, I think a lot of the visual issues, again, pending, actually having documentation so it can be figured out. I think many, if not most of the visual impact issues may be solvable. I think the issues that are much harder, and I've seen these issues argued in a number of communities, have more to do with the intensity of use, the proposed intensity of use of the development, and the fact that there's so little slack built into it, and the development is surrounded by a very sensitive landscape. So that would be my biggest worry, is just making sure that I wasn't setting up a situation that could really harm critical environments. So I think if from an architectural perspective, I would expect the engineering team to really, really have a plan A and a plan B, and give me the assurance that I wasn't going to plant a building of a scale and in a location that could have long-term problems for the environment.
Thank you. Doesn't access to transportation and shopping, isn't there a value you can put on that? Because this site is actually very remote. In addition to not having any real space for outdoor recreation that you brought up, and I realize that that's not always an issue. People live in downtown Boston or Cambridge or certainly Manhattan with similar situations, but we are not downtown Boston or Cambridge or Manhattan. We're a very small New England town. And we need to have affordable housing, but this housing will be barely inside the town limits. It'll be very difficult for anyone living there to get to the center of the village where all the commercial locations are without driving. Children will have very little place to play. People leaving the site by foot will have a fairly long walk down a steep hill. It seems to me there are a lot of architectural negatives here, and I haven't heard a lot of addressing of that. It seems like it's going to be put in here because it's a convenient piece of land in a town where land is not very attainable today, but it may not be the best location to put a residential unit, affordable or not affordable. And I'd like to hear you address a little bit of that.
I think I would go out on a line far enough by accessing what I said before about this particular site creating a lot of issues for the developer, which includes circulation issues, both vehicular and pedestrian, and the remoteness issues. I think it's clear from the technical challenges that this may not be the optimal site. I just want to, remain, as I said at the beginning, I really want to try to give a really fair evaluation of it. So I'm seeing a lot of unsolved issues, and again, some aesthetic issues that I can't even analyze. So I think in the sense that there are a lot of problems that need to be solved with this development, it certainly is much more challenging than a comparably sized site that would be within walkable distance of downtown Manchester by the Sea. I think that seems kind of clear to me. But I do want to balance it by saying that, we live in a society where many parts of many very successful, vibrant communities are really vehicular dependent. So this isn't unusual in that respect. It happens. I think this one, because of the elevation change in such a short distance, has some real questions to answer, even just on that, on As I pointed out in my report, snowy days, getting your kids to school. And others have suggested that the developer needs to provide an evacuation plan, given that there's only one means of egress. So I think the developer would say, if they had a site that didn't have this many technical challenges, they'd jump all over it. No question about that. But I think Manchester by the Sea really doesn't have probably that many sites where you could think about a development of this scale. So I'm not trying to evade your question. It's just, it's a little too broad, I think, for me to address with confidence.
Thank you.
Mr. Engler, did you want to say something?
Does the board, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Jeff Engler from SLV School Street, the applicant. Would the board be interested in maybe 3 or 4 minutes of response to Mr. Boehmer's questions in terms of, and also commitment to what we're going to be providing?
Yeah, I think that we would like a commitment with respect to what you're going to be providing. I think you've had 2 weeks to respond to his review, and that didn't happen prior to this meeting.
Well, in all due respect, the expectation was not communicated relative to us responding before tonight. The expectation was that Mr. Boehmer was going to deliver his presentation this evening, as he has done. We have the benefit of what he provided, and for the next hearing or whenever Mr. Boehmer will be on again, we will provide a response. I think Mr. Boehmer would be the first to admit some of the things that he's requested are not done in an hour or two. They take some time. I don't speak for him. I would hope he would support that.
Yeah, and that is true.
So we will certainly respond. Not only so let me just first by say we appreciate Mr. Boehmer's report, his diligence. We've worked with him on several projects, none of my own developments, but certainly other developments that I've been involved with. And I know Cliff to be an experienced and thoughtful architect. I would respectfully disagree with the characterization that our submittal was woefully inadequate. I grant you that some additional perspectives will be provided and will certainly be helpful to Cliff's review, but the submittal that we provided, I mean, we had renderings, we had elevations, we had floor plans, all of the things that are customarily required as part of a 40B project were all submitted. With that said, as Cliff has represented, our architect has a lot of experience, responding to such requests. We do have good technical acumen, and I'm certain that we can respond in a thorough and meaningful way that will give Cliff the images in the town, the zoning board, members of the public, perspectives that they want to see. We did something to that extent. Cliff was not involved when we were trying to do our lip before the Board of Selectmen when we had a 4-story building, and we'll be providing additional images for Cliff to respond to. So that's important because that got a lot of attention. I'm just going to hop around really quick to some of the other comments that have been made. I have to respectfully chuckle about our mitigation for isolation. One of the reasons we selected this site because it is not impactful to residents or other people using the surrounding area or their quality of life. We have, let's see, 78 participants on the call tonight. If we provided something in town, we would have 780 participants complaining about how it's going to impact Manchester by the Sea. Moreover, when we were discussing transportation, there were great concerns about residents using the beaches and using the parking lot of the MBTA and all sorts of other impacts of the town. And I feel like now we're being criticized for not being integrated with the town. The fact of the matter is the site is the site. We're not changing the location. The location is what it is. The desirability of this site will be through the roof because there's not going to be any other product like this, and there is none now, nor will there be. so it will be a highly desirable site. I've also worked on many projects with Mr. Bomer that have provided no outdoor amenity space, zero, that he's been supportive of. Now, granted, those are in more developed settings, but we feel very comfortable about our outdoor program. Moreover, Mr. Bomer gave us no acknowledgement for the 5,000 square foot plus or minus interior amenity spaces that we'll be providing to all the residents. Moreover, with that said, we are looking at our plan and we expect to be able to provide more outdoor recreational space specifically geared toward children. We do not think this is going to be family housing. It's open occupancy, so anybody's welcome to live here. But with that said, you know, our next iteration will show additional outdoor amenity space. Moreover, I don't think we've been given credit for 14 acres of undevelopable land on our site that people can walk through and walk dogs and go for walks. We would be happy to provide some sort of path to the conservation area, but I could say with pretty great certainty that the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust wants no connectivity whatsoever from our site to their land, passively or otherwise. So we haven't shown any walking paths to that site. If that was something the board wanted, we could do that, at least on our property. So this site, compared to most of the sites I've been involved with Mr. Bomer, is extensively programmed relative to the outdoor space, not minimally. So allow us to take another pass, but we feel very confident with what our program shows. And we feel the quality of life will be very high. Second of all, we did submit a lighting plan and there'll be no light spillover. Does that mean that somebody driving down School Street, if lights are on at night, will not see it? Yeah, they will. Just like if people are driving down any street in Manchester and it's dark and people have their lights on in their house, they'll see those. But we will not have spillover on beyond our property, and our photometric plan has shown as much. So there's no prohibitions there. Also, we're not hiding from the fact that we will have a lot of excavation on this site. However, most of the excavated material is going to be reused on the site because we have to put in the road retaining walls. So while we are excavating, most of that will not leave the site. Moreover, as everybody on this Zoom knows, we're very close to Route 128. So trucks are going to be coming to and from the site from the highway. So it's going to be minimally impactful to the surrounding community if excavation or trucks, whether related to excavation or otherwise, do leave the site. So lastly, and with regards to slack, I mean, Cliff's a technical expert. I would surmise when he's doing construction drawings, he's not building in slack to his design. It's very precise and specific because that's what he's good at. With that said, our engineers and our architects will be very specific with the ultimate program. Because of some recent changes we've made, we actually do have slack. So if we needed to shift the footprint of the building or shift the road slightly or do some other things, we do now have plenty of slack. With that said, this is a very technical exercise, and I don't think we need any slack because we have very good professionals that will design something very, very specifically. But with that said, I thought that warranted some sort of response. So with that said, we look forward to responding to Cliff's narrative, both in writing and with exhibits and visuals. We look forward to, as we've done with environmental partners and the traffic. It's been an iterative process, so we'll respond thoroughly. And then Mr. Bomer will have another opportunity to review what we've submitted and further comment and whatever comments remain from there. And we'll begin to whittling it down. As Mr. Bomer or other people that have done research on our team knows, Embark is a very skilled and qualified architect that's done all sorts of different projects. I have no concern whatsoever that the facades or the materials or the like will not be something that is in keeping. As Mr. Bomer said, we're not building a 3,000 square foot Victorian or colonial or gambrel. It's a large building, but with that said, with Cliff's input, we're open to suggestions relative to the facades and fenestrations and the like, and we'll be providing that. So with that said, Dan, I don't know, Dan Riggs is on the call from Embark. Dan, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to the comments, but we certainly look forward to responding to Mr. Bomer's requests and his written observations. Thank you.
No, I think you really summed it up well, Jeff. I think the only thing I would add is to Cliff's point earlier, Mr. Bomer's point earlier, we have worked really productively with him in the past. And we look forward to responding adequately to all the points that are raised. And especially the public views. So creating those views from the public realm came up a number of times, both in the letter and in his testimony today. So we'll look forward to using those to paint a better picture of the project so everyone can get a better understanding of it. That's all I'll add, and we'll have the rest of it in our response. But thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about an expectation with respect to elapsed time required to do the response and to provide the information Mr. Bomer has asked for, just so I can schedule out meetings accordingly?
Dan, how long will it take you to produce all the various, because we have to, the Madam Chair, one of the important things, and Cliff recognizes this, is the integration and collaboration, if you will, between our architect and our landscape architect to make sure that the images that we're showing are both realistic and can represent both, existing conditions. One of the things, as the board knows, and we provided many exhibits during the LIP process, some of which we provided here, a lot of the existing vegetation is remaining. So it's a combination of representing the existing vegetation with some of the proposed vegetation we'll have at the front entrance and then where our building is situated on the site. So Dan, is it realistic to say, within another week, or is it 2 weeks that you'll have all the exhibits? Because I don't think we're far away, Madam Chair, from having a response to the narrative and having a landscaping plan that shows the additional outdoor amenities. But the public, the views from the public realm are so important that, I think that's where, the review starts. So Dan, what do you feel comfortable committing to?
Yeah, I would love to say 1 week, but as you mentioned, the views from the public realm are it takes some effort to produce and modeling that accurately, and we'll be fully coordinating that with landscape and with civil. And just to kind of allude to a point that Mr. Bomer had raised earlier, we will be doing this in Revit, which is it's a technical software term, but it's a very highly accurate modeling software that we can use to model the topography, all the retaining walls, the building itself, and we'll be including that in the model. So I'd say realistically 2 weeks would be the best estimate I can give.
Okay.
We're going to have it as soon as we can.
Madam Chair, relative to 2 weeks for that, I would say the narrative and the landscape plan could be provided before that. So if the board is comfortable us submitting things a little bit more iteratively, we probably could have the narrative done right, Dan, in a week, and the landscape plan showing, but the other exhibits won't be done probably for 2 weeks.
Absolutely, that's reasonable. Yeah.
And not that it matters or anybody cares, but it's not like I have told our team just to get started on this today. After hearing Mr. Bomer, we had the benefit of his letter submitted, whatever it was, 10 days ago. So our team has already been working on these things. So it's not 2 weeks from tonight. We've already been working on this stuff for a while. So
Great. So if I add 2 weeks to April 5th, that takes me to April 19th. And so, given that, my question to Mr. Bomer is, how much time do you need after that to be able to come back before us? It would either be April 27th or May 11th. Those are two meeting dates I have in the future.
I'm looking at my calendar. It's my calendar that dictates the date more than actual hours required. Let me look. I'm sorry, what were the two dates you suggested?
April 27th or May 11th.
I already have a hearing on the 27th in a
Okay,
different community. And you said May 11th?
yes.
That looks good to me.
Oh, good, okay. I will write you in.
Now, this is assuming we do get materials in a timely fashion.
Right,
Well, we're committing to April 19th.
Okay, great.
And you may have some things in advance of that, Cliff, so.
That works for me, certainly.
fantastic. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which I kind of like to close out traffic. So what I'd like to do is to go through the various traffic access circulation items and confirm with the board that we feel we have enough information available to us to be able to start making decisions with respect to this aspect of the project, okay? So I have three different groupings. One is site access, the location of the entrance, and the curb cut permit waiver. Another is the length of the driveway, second egress, fire code versus ALS needs, snow removal plan, the ADA sidewalk, and the school street sidewalk extension. And then for parking, I have total spaces, guest parking, the size of the drop-off zone, size of spaces, underground parking plantings, and bikes and charging station issues. And third is traffic, which is volumes, 128 ramp improvements, automated pedestrian lights, traffic calming, and a mitigation package. I'll go around the board and see if people feel like we need any additional information in order to address these various issues. I'll start with Jim. Need to unmute yourself, Jim.
I'm going to take a pass on this one. You'll have to
Okay.
come back to me.
Okay, Sean.
I'm feeling like I got enough information.
John.
I'm okay for now. Can we just confirm there's like 3 or 4 letters that between Vanass and environmental partners that, discuss these various traffic items?
Yeah, there's like,
I want to make sure I'm not missing anything because I've been reviewing things. So, as long as that's, I've reviewed everything, and as long as I'm not missing anything else is in terms of the responses that have been back and forth for the last couple months, then I'm good.
okay, so we'll pull that together so that people will know what the dates are of the various correspondence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, to answer the member's question, I think the March 31st memo by Environmental Partners does a pretty good job of extracting all the bit comments from the various letters and exchanges between Vanass and Associates and Environmental Partners. I mean, from our read of that memo, you know, pretty much everything is closed out as it relates to traffic from their perspective, other than 2 issues. So,
Yeah, but we go back to the beginning to just kind of look. I mean, there's waivers requested that we have to look at, even if the items are closed out in the peer review. We still need to make decisions regarding the waivers requested. So the problem is the way it was done is they drop off as you go along. So you can't just look at the last one and know everything. So we'll pull together all of that information. Catherine.
I think what's the question here? John said he didn't think he had all the material. What was the original question?
So the question was, on all those items I went through regarding access, traffic, and circulation, do we have enough information available to us that we can make our decision regarding the various requests that have been made for this segment? In other words, can I close out further requests for information?
And this is just on the traffic and parking, right?
Traffic, site access, parking, and traffic.
Not on snow removal or any of that stuff.
Yeah, snow removal's in there. Length of driveway, location of entrance, ADA sidewalk, school street sidewalk extension.
Okay. I'm not sure right now. I need a minute.
Okay. Brian.
I'm just not sure if it's appropriate, this question now or later, but there seems to be some, Mr. Engler had indicated that he's going to have there's some changes. He's going to be able to make some, maybe adjusting the footprint of the building. It seems to me that might have something to do with the request to hook up to town sewer. Does that going to also, if that eliminates a leaching field, do we, can he entertain, or are we entertaining secondary means of egress now? And I don't know if this is the time to ask that question.
No, that's not the time to ask this question. I think that the sewer and all that stuff will be handled at a different point in time.
Okay, but I'm just saying, but does it impact the ability to add a secondary means of egress? That's it.
We'll have to wait and see what we get. I think that's a whole separate discussion.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I make one point, which I'm only making because Mr. Dietrich didn't get some information, and you asked the board, you know, whether or not they have enough information on these issues. And we made a very, very full and robust submission on March 25th. I'm just confirming that all members received that, because in that we had our full updated plan set. We had a 156-page updated drainage report. We had our response to the Beals and Thomas peer review memo as it relates to civil engineering. We had a response on snow storage. We had a concept plan for the sidewalk. We had an updated waiver request. We had a memo on our sewer strategy. And then we had an exhibit on a possible conservation land restriction offer. I only raise that because I just want to make sure members of the board are aware that that was all submitted, because that ties to your question on, do you have, you know, do members feel comfortable? And I think humbly we've submitted things in all of those areas that have been identified. I'm just
right. We're going to be going through that list later.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just talking traffic because I want to cut off all public comment and
Okay.
all input on traffic and access tonight if the board agrees to it.
Okay, fair enough.
Hammer this into the ground. James,
I think we have an adequate response in all of those areas, that there won't be any new issues. So the answer to your question is yes. We have
Okay.
enough info.
okay. I will now take comments from the public with respect to whether they think there's sufficient information presented on these matters. I'm not going to debate the conditions, a decision on any conditions, any results, but I will take input for things people want us to consider. Okay, Sarah Pierce.
Hi, yes, Sarah Pierce, 9 Friend Street. I just wanted to ask, this is the first I've heard of SLV asking for a public sewer hookup or town water.
That is not going to be discussed tonight. That will
Oh,
be
it's- okay.
discussed on April 27th.
Okay, thank you very
Okay,
much.
Yep. Mr. Leger.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Luke Leger, McGregor, Leger, and Stevens. I represent the Citizens Initiative for Manchester Affordable Housing. Just a couple of very brief comments on this that I do think directly relate to public health and safety issues associated with the project. First, I would just ask that the board keep in mind that every engineer who has reviewed this project independently has flagged the length and grade and design of the project proposed driveway as being really problematic and creating significant public health and safety issues. And they've all called for emergency access. And what we've learned through the applicant's submittals is that due to site constraints and the size of the proposed project, a different design for the roadway is impossible and emergency access is impossible. These things just really come back to the fundamental problem with this project, which is that it's a maximum build project and shoehorned into a constricted and really environmentally sensitive site. So I think with respect to the access issue, the board really needs to take a hard look and carefully consider whether the driveway as proposed does in fact offer sufficient safe access. That is a decision that ultimately falls to you as the board. It's not just a question of access for emergency vehicles. It's a question of whether this provides safe access for residents. We heard Mr. Bomer talking before on a snowy day. Can residents get their kids down to the bottom of the hill to catch a bus? Can they get in and out to get to work? These are exactly the type of questions that the board can and should be considering, in addition to questions of emergency access as well. Obviously, those are important, and there's been a lot of time spent discussing those. But certainly, where access is, in our view, incredibly problematic and is apparently a problem that can't be solved due to the size of the proposal and the challenges that this site presents, we do ask the board to consider that carefully. And I think that the one piece of information, in my view, that maybe hasn't really been adequately addressed in the board's record is the question of whether a waiver is required. There has been discussion previously about the zoning bylaws standard for a maximum length of 500 feet for common driveways. This obviously exceeds that greatly by nearly 4 times. We have heard from the applicant that they don't believe they need a waiver from that. As far as I know, the only thing in the record is, I believe, an email from the applicant saying essentially that he had asked, Mr. Engler had asked someone in the planning department who asked the building inspector, who said there's no waiver requirement. I would respectfully submit to the board that that's not sufficient. In our view, they do need a waiver. And I think it's an important point for the board to establish on the record, because it may well affect the way this is viewed down the line if there were an appeal taken. So I think that's certainly a very important piece of information that is really not adequately addressed in the record. And I think the only other comment I would make as well is that parking is another issue. where, again, given the scale of the project, given the site constraints, we all know the proposed number of spaces is far short of what would typically be required under zoning. We've heard a lot of discussion from all of the consultants reviewing this, confirming that the location of this project is going to require residents to have a car. Anyone coming to visit residents is going to need to drive to get there. And the fact that the applicant needs waivers from those parking requirements, again, just reflects the scale of this project relative to the site and how it really is shoehorned in there. And in our view, parking is a public health and safety issue. Certainly, challenges presented by a lack of parking could directly affect public health and safety of residents. It's going to create conflicts between cars as folks try to find places to park. It's going to create conflicts between cars and pedestrians. And it could also interfere with access for emergency vehicles. So I thank you for your time, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions if the board has any for me, but those are, in our view, very important issues that need to be fleshed out a little bit in the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're good on this board?
Yes.
Okay. Next item I wanted to go through on the agenda is documents we've received from the applicant and items that are still outstanding. As Mr. Engler mentioned, they provided a lot of information to us on March 25th. All of those items are up on our website under received from applicant March 25th. They include an updated civil engineering set. However, that engineering set excludes the on-site wastewater treatment facility. It does not include the sidewalk. And I don't know if it's impacted by the discovery of new vernal pools. That will be discussed when we get to the civil engineering piece. Next is the sidewalk concept plan. I couldn't tell from the plan submitted what the impact is on the overall footprint and the impact on blasting, the proximity to the nearest vernal pool, and the impact on the snow removal storage plan and elevation in comparison to the driveway. Those don't seem to be addressed in the materials submitted, so we'll want a narrative on that or something. Updated drainage report to the tune of 292 pages. I defer to Beals and Thomas on that. The response to the Beals and Thomas engineering peer review. And again, in the response, the applicant removed the wastewater treatment facility. Next was the snow storage strategy. Again, that excludes the impact of the sidewalk on that. Updated waiver requests for the zoning bylaws with additional verbiage explaining why they're needed. A letter regarding the sewer strategy and a proposed conservation land restriction. That sewer strategy requests connection to the municipal sewer system. We will discuss that on our meeting, in our meeting on April 27th. Town needs to do a little more research till we get to that. And then an updated landscape plan that was requested by Beals and Thomas. Then today, just before our meeting, so I'm sure people haven't looked at them, we received updates on the conservation waiver requests, and we received the response to the Beals and Thomas environmental peer review. So to my understanding, what's outstanding at this point is a response to the architectural peer review and additional materials that have been requested in the architectural peer review, as long as the narrative I requested regarding the sidewalk concept plan, if that can get on the list of things to do.
Madam Chair, could you put in writing, or I'm not clear on what you want relative to the sidewalk narrative. And I want to make sure we're compliant with that request. So can Sue or the board or somebody just, because I just, that would be helpful, and we'll respond to those items. I think they're easily addressed, but I don't want to miss anything.
Yep, we'll put that in writing. Okay. Is anyone on the board aware of anything I've missed? Okay. The next item I just wanted to go over is the update on the vernal pool and wildlife habitat studies. I received an email on April 1st from Stacy Minahan of Beals and Thomas. She said that Beals and Thomas was on site today, April 1st, with the proponent's representative, conducted vernal pool and wildlife habitat investigations. All pools, both certified and potential, identified by the proponent, are being used by vernal pool species, and an additional pool was identified. Based on today's visit, we are in agreement with the methodology being used for both the vernal pool and overall wildlife habitat evaluations. We plan to be back on site next Friday, April 8th. So that is in progress. So I wanted to talk about schedules for future meetings so that people can get them on the calendars. My plan is on April 13th, we will meet with Beals and Thomas to discuss environmental and engineering. On April 27th, we'll discuss the requested sewer strategy and may have spillover from environmental engineering into that night, depending on what happens on the 13th. On May 11th, we'll do architectural. And then I have 3 other meetings that I will schedule, not yet sure what the subject matters will be based on how we progress, but one on May 25th, one on June 8th, and one on June 22nd. So those are the 2nd and the 4th Wednesday of the month, like we've been doing. And based on our current schedule, we would need to close the public hearing on June 22nd, unless we get another extension. And what it means is when we close the public hearing, we will not obtain any additional information from the applicant or any member of the public. We will then have 40 days to deliberate, determine what conditions we're going to impose, if any, and write our decision.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I asked to take a pass. You mentioned sidewalk plan.
Yes.
We did get a sidewalk plan. It was included in a zip file that I opened. So what is the question about the sidewalk plan? It looks like there is a sidewalk plan.
Yeah, but it doesn't show how wide the sidewalk is. It doesn't show what the height is versus the road. It doesn't explain what the impact is on the snow removal plan. If it's higher than the road, how do you remove the snow? It doesn't explain whether they need to increase the footprint in order to add that sidewalk. more blasting, and doesn't explain the proximity to the nearest vernal pool.
That is all correct.
That's what I was looking for,
Okay.
was a narrative explaining those things, because based on the picture, it was just a picture. There were no dimensions that I could see, unless that was me. You know, it was another schematic.
Well, it was shown in the drawing and it said it was an ADA compliant sidewalk, so that's.
But it wasn't on the civil engineering set, so it didn't have any dimensions. It was just a picture.
Okay.
So all the new civil engineering sets didn't include it.
Correct. I mean, I think it's more than a picture, but I mean, respectfully, we can get a fully engineered plan, but in the interim, please do provide us with your request as it relates to the sidewalk, and we'll answer them.
Right, okay. Anything else we need to cover today in the public hearing? If not, I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing on the 40B application of Jeffrey Engler of SLV School Street LLC at School Street, Assessors Map number 43, lot number 18, filed with the town clerk on September 27, 2021 to April 13, 2022 at 7 p.m. Do I have a second?
A second.
Sean seconds. I'll take a roll call vote. Jim,
Approved.
Sean,
Approved.
John,
Yes.
Catherine,
Approve.
Brian,
Yes.
James,
Approved.
and Sarah approves. Now we'll move to administrative matters. I don't believe we have any minutes to review.
That is correct.
Good, because I didn't read them.
What did I read?
I don't know.
I liked it. Whatever I read it.
Um,
February meetings, the February minutes, weren't they?
Yeah, Sarah, the minutes for February 9th, I needed to add the questions and they were added and I re-forwarded them yesterday. But everyone's had them for several weeks.
Yes, I reviewed them.
I think we're going to have to defer to the next meeting to review them. February 19th? Okay.
February 9th.
Right. Okay. I mean, did other people review them?
I read them, Sarah.
I
Okay.
did too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wrote it.
Do I have
I
a
did.
motion to approve the minutes for February 9th?
I make a motion.
Sean makes a motion. Do I have a second?
I second. James.
James seconds. I'll take a roll call vote. Jim,
Yes, approved.
Sean,
Approved.
John,
Yes.
Catherine,
Approve.
Brian,
Approved.
James,
Approve.
and I'll abstain since I didn't read them. Okay. Are there any other matters that I didn't anticipate that people would like to raise at this point?
I'm good.
Okay. So I'll circulate the communication regarding the traffic to make sure, out a list, make sure people have everything.
That would be great, because I know I've been reading everything that comes across my desk, but sometimes I'm not sure which things we're focused on in which meeting, so that would be helpful. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, yep.
Can you repeat the May dates, meeting dates for me, just so that I have
Oh,
them?
sorry. May 11th
Okay,
and May 25th.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, and you got the June ones?
Sarah, Do we have the letter from Minahan on the walks that she did on the site?
No, because it was in my email and I didn't distribute it. That's why I had to read it.
Could you forward that to me and I'll distribute it?
I sure
and post
will.
it?
Yes,
Well, thank you, and I was going to quote it in the minutes.
okay.
Thank you. Yeah, really.
So everyone's clear that our meeting on April 13th will do environmental engineering, and we have received the applicant's responses to both of those peer reviews. One on the 25th and one today that I forwarded to you at between 4 and 5 o'clock
5:10.
tonight.
Have our
Okay.
consultants received these responses?
Certainly not the ones from today, I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
But I'll check with Sue Brown to make sure that they get to them.
And so are we expecting another round of responses from the consultants before the next meeting?
Hopefully,
Okay.
we'll check on that. Because
And then-
it's
Sorry.
2 weeks away. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, as things get posted to the website, it's super helpful to have the dates in the file names. That way we can follow the chronology. So I know a lot of these files already have the dates, but you know, to the extent we can continue that, it's super helpful.
To find
Okay.
stuff, really helpful.
Let me call on Sue Brown because she might have information regarding.
Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to let you know that the May 20 or the March 25th report was circulated, and the applicant circulated his response today, that was sent today to Stacy and that team. So the consultants have those responses from the applicant.
And can you just touch base with them to confirm that we'll be meeting on April 13th?
Yes, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, okay. And, you know, I guess they need to give us feedback whether they want to separate engineering and environmental, or whether we can do it the same night.
Okay,
I just
Yeah.
need feedback on that.
sounds good.
Okay. I'm sure there's going to be more iterations, so it probably makes sense to do both of those on the 13th
Yes, two separate teams, so I would
to
think.
move them along, yeah. Okay. If that's it, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Okay, take a roll call vote. Jim,
Yes.
Sean,
Sean?
Just
And
nod.
Me or Sean? I'll say yes.
Just nod, Sean.
John,
Yes
John,
for me.
Catherine,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
James,
Approved, yes.
and Sarah says yes. Thank you all, and don't forget that we have a site visit next Monday,
5:30.
5:30.
Nice job on tonight's meeting, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nicely done. Very well organized.
And